A big issue that we woke up to this year was Trump tariff and Trump policies.
In the context of Global South and development, if we think about the fact that there are large diaspora communities,
USAID will no longer exist.
Poor people are incredibly resilient because they survive.
Resurgence in Tanzania, where President Suluhu's regime has been questioned during the election, a lot of bloodshed.
Would he pull out of NATO? If you cannot have stability, then you cannot grow.
All of these affect the Global South's ability to have certainty, stability, and to move on.
Market connections existed between Global South before the white man came and colonized.
We also saw a revolution in Indonesia, but they also probably learned from the mistakes of the Hasina regime and they did not do those. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, from wherever you're listening. I'm Rubaiyath Sarwar, Managing Director at Innovation Consulting. I'm here in Dhaka now, and I'm joined by Jyoti Rahman from Australia. Hello, Jyoti.
Hello, I'm well and going to start our discussion in a sec. We apologize for a bit of tardiness because, well, it will become very clear why as we talk. I'm at the moment just connecting various, sharing the live links to various so that people can tune in. But good to be here with you, Rubaiyath, and hello to everyone who's dialing in to listen.
So those of you who are joining us new, J&J Fireside is a talk between myself, Jyoti, and also Jyoti Rahman, Jyoti. So we both work in the space of international development, but in two different, while Jyoti works on macroeconomic policies and his works relate to fiscal issues and monetary policies, my works mostly relate to enterprise and household level issues. But we both work around the world. We travel across the Global South and we try to connect the dots between the Global South experience. It's more of a Global South dialogue, but in certain cases, we do make it a little bit Bangladesh specific, but maybe in 2026, it will be more global than Bangladesh. But today we join also in a very critical time here in Bangladesh. Lots of things are changing. And what has changed this morning is also very deep for Bangladesh. We mourn on the death of Begum Khaleda, ex-Prime Minister of Bangladesh, who governed Bangladesh for 2 terms. Very charismatic leader. And both Jyoti Rahman and I deeply mourn. And today we will also touch upon Begum Khaleda's governance and also her policies. I believe Jyoti Rahman has done a lot of work on that. So he will also catch on that and also lay upon those issues on explaining how those are related to the Global South's cooperation and development that we speak about. Once again, we deeply mourn Begum Khaleda's passing.
Thanks, Rubaiyath. Just to add to that, so and putting ourselves and today's show and everything in a bit of context, and as Rubaiyath explained, the reason, with Mrs. Zia passing away, our mourning had not been what we had planned for. So this show came out from various other discussions and chats and WhatsApp groups and online and physical activities that sort of events and roundtables and stuff that Rubaiyath and I had the pleasure of working together in Bangladesh for the last year throughout 2025. They actually started before that. They started in 2024 or even earlier, but with the fall of the previous dictatorship in Bangladesh in August 2024, we started doing a whole bunch of things. And this show came from that. And we did 3 episodes, as Rubaiyath explained, also Jyoti, both of us are Jyoti, therefore J&J. We both travel to various that are broadly, we could call it Global South or on Global South issues. And usually we dial in from whenever one of us is on the road and sort of we talk around where we are and what we are seeing and so on. We thought our plan today was that we were going to do an end of year, year-end review kind of thing and touch on a few things that we had seen in different places throughout 2020. And we thought that we would experiment, with StreamYard and, sort of live on multiple channels and so on. However, the morning has not quite been, we woke up with a sad news, and that has affected our preparation a bit. So, but we'll get there in future, I guess.
Surely. And on that note, basically, the theme I would say for today would be pivoting. Because what I have experienced throughout this year is about pivoting almost every day. There was a plan for a meeting or an interview or let's say workshop, and something happened and we had to pivot, and today also we are pivoting from our original plan and discussion. And I think that is a common theme across the world, actually, not necessarily global south, because a big issue that we woke up to this year was Trump tariff and Trump policies. Tariff came later, but I was traveling in London in January, and then in Brighton and also in Cambridge. Started from Kuala Lumpur, where I was having a brief family trip, but then I traveled to Singapore and then came to Bangladesh briefly for 24 hours and then traveled to London, where we were starting UK Research Initiatives grant with Cambridge University, University of Sussex in Brighton. So I was there and I was working at the same time on a trade, investment and finance project funded by USAID in Palestine, West Bank and Gaza. So I was deeply working on both of these issues. And I specifically remember the morning that the Trump's announcement of USAID's fall came. And I was actually just typing on my laptop the report that I just started on Palestine. And so I was working on Palestine, and then this came up, USAID will no longer exist. And immediately I wrote to my colleagues, what do we do? So they then said, okay, we are on 18th January. We can pay you up until 24th January and no later than that. And I said, but my work would require 2 more weeks. So anyways, so what happened is that I would come to the work that I was doing, because I think that there was a lot of learning that I would want to share from the Palestine work. But what happened actually is that we decided to pay, because I felt it was a huge work and important work, and the lessons from it would be important moving forward. So even though we are not paid, we have to complete it. That's what I felt. And then I moved on to Cambridge and Brighton, where we were working on our UKRI work. So I would come back to that. But Jyoti Rahman, over to you. How did the year start for you?
Well, pivoting is probably the right metaphor, frame. End of last year to me was, also a sad thing, in that my father had passed away, and I had the phone call and hop on the plane. I mean, end of passing, Mrs. Zia's passing away. There is the beginning of the year or end of last year to end of this year. There is a bit of sameness there, but also instead of dwelling on the sadness, we should also reflect on, this is something that is probably true for, it's definitely a sad occasion for anyone anywhere in the world, but in the globalized global south, or in the context of global south and development, if we think about the fact that there are large diaspora communities, in fact, even within a country, that there are large internal migrant communities. So if we think about, say, for example, in Bangladesh, there are anywhere between 5 to 15 or 20 million people, depending on who's counting and who's counted, people of Bangladesh origin that do not live in the country, the expats, migrant workers in the Middle East, or, immigrants in the West, and whatnot. But also within Bangladesh. So in the greater Dhaka region, there's probably 25-30 million people. A lot of those people would have their parents back in some village somewhere. And that kind of pivoting to hear the sad news about your parents, and therefore having to drop, whatever else you may have, or not even, or it could be even more tricky that, like, they are not well. And you have a tricky balancing act in that, do you go right away, or do you wait, prepare for the sad news, and so on. These are daily trade-offs that probably, and this is not just in Bangladesh, this would be true in Egypt, this would be true in Philippines, this would be true throughout Africa or many other places, right? So, and the fact that against the backdrop of demographic change and other social change. So, in 2 generations ago, 3 generations ago, firstly, people did not live as long, and therefore, sort of these kind of dilemmas would probably have happened when people are, people don't have multiple generation of obligation. So if the life expectancy is 55 or 60, and so, sort of your parents probably pass away at an age when you are much younger and you don't have children, whereas life expectancy has gone up around the world, including in development. However, we have not, and we have, our family sizes have gotten smaller. Our social structures are changing because of economic development and modernization and so on. However, countries in the global south that have not become advanced enough or rich enough to develop formalized aged care system, old homes, and all of that. So this is a pivot that's deeply personal and individual, that is probably going to be faced by every household. But also there is a huge societal element here that the countries that we travel to, the countries that we work in, I don't think we are ready. I don't think we don't even talk about this in, at least in Bangladesh, I'm not aware of any public discourse around this. And I have seen in other developing countries where, the societies are not ready for massive demographic change that they are going through.
So I just would connect to what you're saying. I think everywhere in the world we need to pivot, but the pivoting is more significant in the global south. And the reason being that we are dependent on a lot of external factors. So unlike in the global north, where things are more stable, where you have, let's say, everything more or less defined, structured. So you know that you will go out and take the bus or the train. It will take 35 minutes to reach. And if it is not, then you will already have a SMS notification that don't go out because there is a blizzard. And so your uncertainties are lesser. But here in Bangladesh, I wake up in the morning and I would go to the office. I don't know whether there will be a roadblock or how it is going to emerge. And suddenly all my schedule for the whole day is blotched out because there are meetings to have, there are calls to have, there are deliverables to submit. So, and suddenly all of the things need to be pivoted. And now take it to the global scale. So let's say, as I started speaking, we were dependent on USAID to a certain degree in the world of development space. And no matter how much I tried to say that USAID was not big enough, but it had a kind of a multiplier effect across the world. So USAID money was within World Bank. It was within ISC. It was not just direct USAID money coming to the grantees. So our firm was a grantee. We had a lot of USAID project. We had to suddenly stop them. We had to figure how to not furlough the staff, rather integrate them in the ongoing project or new project that we needed to acquire. Suddenly, the whole business plan that we had for 2025, it changed in a flash within 3 weeks. And we had to pivot again to change the whole business plan for the year. So, and it continues. And later, when I was in Kuala Lumpur for the ASEAN Business Summit, the core theme was, okay, so post these, how do we then evolve? And everybody was talking about, let's say, okay, forget about USAID. We have $5 billion that we can get from the philanthropic organizations in the ASEAN because we have these and these. So it shows that the pivoting is all across. And talk about Nigeria, for instance. We have a project going on, and it's in Sokoto in northern Nigeria. And just 2 days back, America attacked Sokoto with the approval of the Nigerian government. So, but just imagine, even if it's a Nigerian government approved attack by US in the Nigerian soil, it is destabilizing the country. Right. So take that note. So which means our works in Nigeria is affected. And then say, for instance, we're working in Ethiopia, and suddenly the kind of conflict that they have also in Ethiopia in the Tigray region, it intensified. And then we have the Sudan issue, right? So all of these affect the global South's ability to have certainty, stability, and to move on, which is where the pivot comes in. And I actually now am thinking that maybe by doing too many pivot, whether we are resilient, but also the challenge here is that barely grow. How would you?
So the resilience factor is very. We see this in developing countries all the time, both at that macro level, but also at a very micro individual level. That poor people are incredibly resilient because, well, we know that because they survive. I mean, that's by definition. But without certain degree of stability, you cannot grow, right? If I take it to the macro level, right, and this is basically what my job in most places is. It's macro fiscal kind of issues, and this is something I suspect in each of the shows I'll come back to this theme again and again. Stability is it's vital. Okay, if you cannot have stability, then you cannot grow. A country that is growing at, say, 3%, 4% a year is going to take. So if you're growing at 4% a year, and then to double your per capita income, you are looking at a generation. 72 divided by 4 gets you to something like, what is it, 418. That's 18 years. But if a country that is growing by 6 or 8, quicker. However, if you're growing by, say, 6, 7, and then after that you suffer a massive shock, and then you have 2 years of 0 or 1%, that is probably much worse than a country that is growing 4% slow and steady. Because if you're growing at slow and steady pace, and you don't suffer that kind of negative shock, then your society is going to be more stable and they're going to be more able to adapt. So I look behind you, I see a marketplace. So I'm going to ask, what is, so tell us about that. But also I'll just note that marketplace is, to me, it looks like, this is the core of resilience and stability, market exchange, and so on. I also want to talk about the Trump tariffs and what we have seen, the effect of that, the whole Trump policies in wherever we go. But first, tell us about your marketplace behind you.
That's a series from one of my favorite artists, Sultan Ishtiaq. So his Karan Bazaar Nights, actually Karan Bazaar. But what you
It's
like?
Karan Bazaar, is it? It looks very much something that could be in North Africa or
So that,
the
that that's
Silk Road or anywhere, right?
Indeed. So that's the interesting part. So what he does is that typically Bangladeshi people are stunned. We're small, we're short, we're not long. So what Sultan does is he paints his Bangladeshi characters in a very elongated. So they're long, their hands are very long, so their legs are very long. So he deliberately makes them so, and many people who see my works of Sultan, and they say that these don't look like Bangladeshis. And so the philosophy that is there is that he doesn't want to portray Bangladeshis to portray them as a
Okay.
strong, long, big. So which is why they are. But the reason why I also collect this painting, there's a small little anecdote here. My career started in 2004 when I was working on sector development. And I first was working on industrial sectors, furniture, plaster, and so forth, and leather. And then I quickly had a extended portfolio, which also included rural sectors, and vegetable was a big sector that we were working on at that time, trying to improve and yield of our vegetable. And then it was also the time when winter vegetable was not anymore winter. So we were having year-round. So in Bangladesh, remember in our childhood, tomato would come during winter.
That's right.
Now
Yes.
tomato is year-round vegetable. So it was also the year when we were expanding all the vegetable year-round. So Karan Bazar was a pretty big place for us because it was.
Well, Karan Bazaar has been a trading hub. I mean, the name Karan is a derivation of caravan,
I
and
didn't know that.
bazaar is
Okay.
bazaar. So yeah, like
I didn't know that
uh,
caravan is caravan. Okay.
yeah,
Everybody,
caravan comes
business.
from this caravan, right? So
Okay.
and as you know, caravans. I mean, this is So the name actually is Caravan Bazaar or Karva Bazaar, because caravan in the North Indian or Farsi is it's Karava. So the that Caravan Bazaar is something that you would see in all Mughal or Ottoman or Persian or Central Asian cities. So this is sort of connecting all the way to the Silk Road and all of that, and and that is actually an appropriate thing to talk about in the context of globalization in the face of Trump, South cooperation, and all of those things. Right? It's sort of these kind of market connections existed before Europe. Market connections existed between global South before the white man came and colonized.
Indeed,
And
and actually, all the roads and routes that were for trade. So it was basically for search for spices, and then search for opium, and then opium trade led to all the Persian regional trades and etc. It's a very interesting story, and how even the timbers from Myanmar, how it was traded all across, and then palm from Malaysia. Very interesting, yeah, indeed. So, but Jyoti Rahman, let me ask you, if you are to five or three major development in the global south in 2020.
well, three, five, that's probably too much. Let's start with one. Okay. So,
Okay.
one thing that I have seen in the places so I'll talk about probably two things. One, I have seen directly, it's a positive thing. The other one, also, sort of something that I've been reflecting on, connects to Begum Zia's. So, the first one that I have seen or I have not seen, which is you mentioned Trump tariff or Trump USA, and so at the places that I went to when I traveled in the first half of the year or first quarter of there was a sense of doom and gloom amongst the international organizations, your UN types or your IMF or World Bank type. There was a sense of doom and gloom about okay, what does Trump what is Trump? Where does he stop? And what will happen? So it's not just that US aid is being cut. I heard people quite seriously thinking that okay, what if Trump pulls out of this, that, or other? Climate change, yeah, well, Trump doesn't care about climate change. We know that he pulled out of Paris before, but where would he stop? Would he pull out of NATO? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. Would he? People were asking, would he shut down? Would he pull out of the IMF or World Bank? And if they did, then what would happen to this? Would he pull out of UN? So it's one thing to cut funding. It's another thing if the global hegemon, if the US actually pulls out of this entire architecture. Okay, he's putting on tariffs. He doesn't care about WTO. Fine, we can rearrange those kind of. But if he pulls out of things like the IMF, that's a whole different thing altogether. So there was a lot of these kind of things. People in the global south, as in the policymakers that I had interacted, but also in these international organizations themselves. By the end of the year, I think these people have become a lot more relaxed about it. They have come to learn that the administration says a lot of things, and there is a lot of news headline. A lot of this is just news, and that of course, things are not going to be as they were before, but they're not going to be so bad that they had pivoted. They had learned. Obviously, it would be better if you didn't need to pivot. Obviously, it is better if everything works with the system and you know what the system is and you follow the rules. That is obviously better. But at the same time, it's not so chaotic that the world is falling apart. That is probably one thing. I didn't actually get chance to make up any charts or anything, but global trade actually is still growing. A lot of the countries that we both work in, they have seen their exports continue to thrive. I mean, if you are already growing by, if your exports are already growing by 20%, 30%, you are still probably growing by 15, 20%. And if you already had an exports problem, well, Trump shock is probably just another shock, but your problems are probably much more homegrown. If you're a conflict zone, and that's why you cannot take your export material to your port because it's being blown up by rebels. Well, okay, that's a problem you already have. It's not that Trump has significantly made that work. So I think that is one thing that to me suggests that global South can do a lot of things both for good and evil themselves. Probably so, and then that will lead me to my second point, which is about the importance of policy transition, and so on. But first, I want to hear from you, and then I also want to show up
Great. Yeah, I was supposed to show pictures too, but I didn't. So we will
next
skip
time.
yours.
Next time.
But quickly, few things that I have noticed throughout this year. One is the unification of the global. There is increasing interest among the global South too. So when the South African president Kuala Lumpur in the ASEAN summits, they want to deepen the tie, the ASEAN. And then he directly says, "I sniff." So you can understand the interest and willingness to cooperate. So there is growing interest for collaboration between Africa and Asia, and also within Asia, within ASEAN. Borders are being opened. So the African corridor is being opened. It's working good for Africa. ASEAN has interoperable digital payment systems now. So the global South, which has been more restricted, is opening up actually. And that's why it's kind of frustrating for me as an economist, as a development economist, to see how fractured our part of South Asia is. And then we continue to, let's say, divide us and then find rhetoric to divide us. I'm not at all a proponent of countries fighting with each other. I'm for increased trade, increased friendship, improved friendship, and handshake. So people may critique me, but I am a strong proponent of diplomacy. I don't like fight. I like to settle things with you. We will cover that later. But I think the South Asia actually has kind of deviated from how the global South has worked. In South Asia did not work like. And there is now increasing talk about, let's say, India becoming a part of RCEP, which India previously did not want, but it has emerged during the ASEAN talk. So that would also show that, and also look at Bangladesh. At the end, we were trying to have one-on-one FTF with Japan and Korea. So, which is showing that the South Asian countries are trying to do it independently, but we're not working as the South Asia region. So, which I think is against the wind in 2025. But also a common issue that has emerged, a residual from 2024, is that we had resurgence in Tanzania, where President Suluhu's regime has been questioned during the election, a lot of bloodshed. I was in Tanzania last year, and people were talking the regime and how probably the regime was taking textbook governance from Hasina. They were finding commonalities there, and they were actually predicting the unrest. And the same thing happened in Indonesia. Last year, when we had a project in Indonesia, and I was working there briefly. And during July, I was in Asia, and my colleagues were also saying the same thing, that they also were facing in Indonesia. And so we also saw a revolution in Indonesia, but that the government was able to contain it. They agreed to it. They also probably learned from the mistakes of the Hasina regime, and they did not do those. So they contained it, and the country moved forward. And then we had in Nepal a 24-hour revolution that toppled the government. Surprisingly, the same government that was toppled. So this is very, very interesting situation that is happening in the global South throughout the year. And so actually, I would want to talk to you about how all of these would culminate to 2026. What are the trends that we're going to see in 2026? There's going to be an election in Bangladesh. Tariq Rahman has come back. Begum has just passed. We had a very high profile political ascent in Bangladesh. And then we have all of these coalition issues coming up. I would like to pick up from there, projecting what is going to happen in Bangladesh, and then projecting to the world. How are we going to see the global south working for this year? And on that note, Jyoti Rahman, I would also like you to highlight some of the encounters you had, and I would do that as well.
All right. So start with the Gen Z revolutions or uprising. We should probably dedicate one of our future episodes, maybe in a country where maybe when we dial in from a country that kind of high youth population. I will be in Egypt in January, and I believe you would be Nigeria and Ethiopia. So all three countries have that youth.
Yeah.
So that would be an appropriate time to talk about probably a more detailed talk about why these things are happening and so on. One interesting thing that we have seen, not just in Bangladesh, but also in Nepal, in Indonesia, you mentioned, in Tanzania. We had seen this in 2024 in Kenya. Last year we saw it in Madagascar, whole bunch of places, or this year in 2020, whole bunch of places, youth come out and sort of riots and or uprisings or street activism, toppling the government or not toppling the government and so on. Unlike many other waves of revolutions in the past, which had clear political ideology or economic platform. So if you go back to, say, for example, the Arab Spring, or if you go back to 1989, uprisings against the communist regimes, these uprisings, or go back to the 60s, there were clear political agenda, economic agenda, and so. Whereas these more, Gen Z uprisings tend to be lightning fast because people are connected on social media, and injustice happens. Everyone sees it in real time. They respond. The things vary from country to country. In some countries, government becomes really murderous, as was the case in Bangladesh. They go and kill over 1,000 people, and so on. In other countries, government pulls back and says that, look, we cannot handle this, and so on. In other countries, government concedes the specific injustice or grievance or whatever, right? They government takes the correct steps, and it never even escalates to government falling. Yeah, so we should, and so this is one thing I do see happening more and more around, because those factors continue to exist. All right, there is no shortage of injustice in the world, particularly in the global, and also no shortage of young people, unfortunately, with not gainfully, productively, their time not being productively utilized, and they're angry. So this is probably one thing. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that there is each country varies. Okay, on the one hand, I do think that this is a global trend, but on the other hand, I would be extremely wary of pundits who say that, just because something X happened in country Y, therefore this is also applicable in country Z, whether that is Bangladesh or whether that is Nigeria and so on. I think that the country circumstances play a very, very important. Thinking specifically in terms of Bangladesh, I do think that the election is going to be quite peaceful, and we are going to have a democratic transition. There will be an elected government. Elected governments or post-uprising government are not necessarily reformist governments. So this is something I think we would do well to understand, and this is relevant anywhere in global. And the reasons for that, going back to the pivoting point, each of these governments typically find themselves dealing with manifold crises, day in, day out, week in, week out. So having a very nice plan that, we want to reform X, Y, Z, if we get to power, the plan is very useful. To have an idea that the things that you would want to, you need to be agile. The governments need to be agile and say that, okay, yes, in theory, it would be very nice to do these 5 reforms in this sequence. We would start with fixing our currency, and then after that, we are going to tackle tax system, and then we are going to do agriculture, whatever. It's very, very good to have a roadmap or a script and so on, but be ready to do whatever you need to do whenever you can. So countries that try to do the textbook reform don't tend to do that well, because plans meet reality, and when that reality, countries that can respond to those pressures in an agile manner probably tend to do reforms better. You reform what you can when you can, and this is where I would again draw in the experience legacy of Begum Khaleda Zia when she became prime minister in 1991. The only piece of genuine tax reform in Bangladesh's history, okay, when the value-added tax was brought in. This was not in BNP's electoral manifesto. It wasn't anybody's electoral manifesto, not just the BNP, but none of the political parties. Nobody went in and said, if you vote us, we are going to, reform the tax. Now, tax reform is important because poor countries, these governments do not collect much revenue. The little revenue that they do collect tend to be on customs and import tax, and that is distortion, because you are raising the price of imports. The reason you do that is because it's easy to administer. Right? Things are coming in across the border, either in a port or in an airport or on a truck across the border. You can see it, you can stop it, you can tax it. Poor countries tend to have high concentration of. However, it's distortionary because it changes the prices, protects weak firms domestically, and all of those kinds. So you want to move away from import taxes. You want to have consumption taxes and other kind of taxes, wealth taxes or land taxes, but those are harder to do. In Bangladesh, apparently, what happened was that in the 80s there was a whole bunch of technical work done in the Ministry of Finance and the Board of Revenue and so on. Our current governor of the Bangladesh Bank, Dr. Hassan Mansour, back in the 80s, he was much younger. Okay, he was probably similar age as us, and he came in as an international expert to Dhaka and did a lot of the legwork. But the military regime that ruled Bangladesh in the 80s didn't want to actually go through with any of these reforms, because probably for political reasons, right? That they didn't have, they felt that they didn't have the political mandate. They knew that a new tax would be unpopular, and a new tax is always unpopular. So when the Begum Zia government came in, there was that window. There was a political window. There was also an economic window, in that Bangladesh was, this was just after the first Gulf War. So this is when Iraq had invaded Kuwait, and there was that war in 1991. Bangladesh, being a remittance-dependent country, even back then, was hit really hard. And Bangladesh was on an IMF program. And, as you know, these IMF programs, or these Washington programs, they tell you that, okay, there are certain things, you cut subsidies, you raise taxes, etc. You stabilize XYZ. There's a prescription, there's a plan. In this case, government came in, there was that economic opportunity, crisis that became an opportunity or a window of opportunity. The technical work had been done, so the government had pushed through. So there was the value-added tax, there were reforms to the company tax, company legislation or company acts. There were other pro-market reforms. Tariffs were cut. So the idea was that you bring in a new tax, you get rid of old taxes. So the markets were liberalized, or trade was liberalized. We benefited from all of those things. The moral of the story is that it's good to have plans. It's good to be prepared. Better to be agile and do things that you can do. Pivot to things that you can do. Don't wait for the perfect. Don't wait for a prescription that we're going to do X, Y, Z.
And on that note, once you pivot, and it's also important to have in countries like ours, the challenge is that in most of the cases, as regime changes, they fundamentally. But fortunately, some of the policies that were continued, and actually, good or bad, many of the initiatives that the BNP government took in 1991 and then in 2001 were continued. Case in point, the RAB. So in 2000, and were continued for whatever reason. But that's non-economic. I won't go into that. But I am just raising the point that there requires, and whoever comes to power, all the countries in Global South have to do a better job in understanding, okay, how to build on the previous regime. I think one common binding factor across the Global South, more in Africa probably, not so much in ASEAN, is the tendency to dismantle everything that was done before and let's do everything anew. and trying to do something bombastic. So all of these in Nigeria, we have seen a catastrophe because of that. We talked about it before, so I won't come into that. The whole oil price and so on and so forth, and naira development. But coming to Bangladesh, as you said, you are not going to see probably you're predicting that we are probably not going to see a very strong reformist. And I think I subscribe to that because given so much uncertainty, I also the future government in Bangladesh in the six to be very revolutionary, to be very entrepreneurial, that they're taking a lot of, let's say, game-changing initiatives. Probably there has to be a calm. And I think what you're also projecting, Jyoti Rahman, is that you are seeing more unrest in 2026. A lot of the other countries are also are behind, and they would try to catch up to these
This
changes.
way. Yes.
So, but the point is, I think we may see two streams development indices, and in one stream there would be concerted effort to let's say have peace and calm. Countries would try to strike deals, countries would try to eliminate unrest to a certain degree, but there is also this other element that because the global, we didn't talk about it, but the global north is facing a lot of
Yes.
hardship, a lot of economic. So because the global north is facing so much crisis and the global south is developed, and this is the balance that we live in, and that balance is so that will continue. The global north's economic tensions will continue, which will mean that the global south will strive for finding new territories and newer grounds. All in all, I think we are going to see a lot of policy changes across the global south, a lot of new partnerships. We will also see strong policies to calm the overall economic issues. There would be drive for employment across the global south. And it's not only Bangladesh which will be striving for that. Our partners, our neighbors, India, Nepal, all of them would be trying to do that. Philippines would be trying to do that, which means even for remittance that we are projecting to grow, which will grow, I believe, we will have competition. Fortunately, Bangladesh is trading in a segment which is again like RMG. We're in a low cost migrant worker segment, while most of the other countries have moved up. So we will probably not see more competition in our segment. That is also something tricky that I or we will need to talk about in the future, because whether we get stuck in this low cost segment because of that and we export more and more of our workers in low cost construction and let's say sectors work and so on and so forth. So yeah, so it is not all gloom and doom, but probably it is also going to be sunshine throughout the year.
It's
That's
not.
probably
That's
what
right. It's not going to be sunshine, but nor is it doom and gloom. I think you are right that governments will strive for stability in Bangladesh as well as governments around global south. They see the Gen Z and they see that okay, if you don't address whatever the local problem is, it becomes a nationwide problem. So I on the one hand I do see that there will be more such events, but also I see that governments becoming more responsive. Whether that's a democratically elected government or a dictatorship, whether it's a government of the left or government of the right, doesn't matter. They would all be responsive or more responsive. And you are right that global north is going to have its significant structural difficulties. I see that more as an opportunity for the global south because it forces these governments to actually be more self-reliant, more resilient, or basically look within and see that, or amongst themselves, amongst the peers. Yes, Bangladesh is less connected, or South Asia is less connected than other parts of the world. But the fact that the South African president came to ASEAN in Southeast Asia also tells you that connections and networks don't need to be necessarily with your immediate neighbor. It's better if you are trading with your neighbor, but if that's not the possibility, you can trade with three houses down the road. I would like to show a picture just to lighten the mood a bit, but also it's similar to your Kauran Bazar image there, and remind our viewers that that the global South connection predates the predates the European colonial era. So let's see. screen, and here we go. So can we see it? Yes, now we can. So what do we see here? So the left hand side, it's from Tashkent. So
Right.
Tashkent is the capital of Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan is a doubly landlocked country, which makes it very difficult in the modern era for it to trade with the world. Doubly landlocked basically means it has to go through two countries before it gets to a. What is being cooked here? What is being cooked? Pilaf. They call it Central Asian pilaf, which is basically this pulao that we have in our part of the world, in Bangladesh. Basically, if you travel from anywhere from Maghreb or West Africa, Atlantic coast, all the way to Southeast Asia, Philippines and Indonesia, right? In this stretch, anywhere in the world, you have some variation of rice and meat and vegetable cooked together. In some places, it's done with a covered big pot that we call biryani, kachi. That's one kind of tradition. Or it's done in a very high flamed fry, such as variations of fried rice. Sometimes you put tomatoes and other pastes and stuff in it, seafood and stuff, jollof rice, or Southeast Asian fried rice or whatever. But this rice, meat, and vegetable cooked together. This is sort of from Atlantic to the Pacific stretch of humanity. Sort of love this stuff. So this is in Tashkent. This massive pot being cooked, and Tashkent is also, of course, it's an old silk route, right, dating back 2000 years. The right hand side is Cairo. So this was in the world city of Cairo, which is about 700-800 years old. Okay, so it's from the time of the Fatimid sultans in about 12th, 13th century. Now this world city is a big bazaar, big market. So it's Khan El Khalili market. This is basically you can buy anything in this market, and of course you have to bargain. And you ask for something, and they say 500 Egyptian pounds, and then you bargain, and you buy it for 50 pounds, and the guy probably still has made a huge profit on it. This is again what they tell you, the food culture and this market. What they tell me, what I when I look at these things, it tells me that and connectedness existed in our civilizations way before the Western colonizers came along and said that this is this empire and this is that empire and so on. And so I look to 2026 and beyond, and what you were saying in terms of Southeast Asia, South Africa, South African president coming to Southeast Asia and saying that, look, sort of I sniff money. I look at these pictures and I see that, okay, look, we in this part of, in old Eurasia, in around Indian Ocean, in Africa, we had been trading with each other for a long time before the West. And it's time, countries in the global South, we start building our own networks and own connections again. We don't have to rely on WTO and institutions built and governed from the West. That's that picture.
It gives me the excuse not to have done that exercise as you asked for, because what you did is brilliant. And what if I did something else? I mean, I would have left two images for our viewers, which was not essential. Fantastic, and I totally agree with you. And you were actually reminding me of the Grand Bazaar in Istanbul. So the great Grand Bazaar. And actually, if you as soon as you arrive in Taksim Square in Istanbul, for instance, the spices, the fish, and the meat, and etc. All of those will consume you. And I was just talking to you about the old city in Sana'a, which is something as you have shown. So you can travel back 1,000 years immediately, and still I don't know. I mean, what is left? But I as far as I've heard from my Yemeni colleagues, that old city of Sana'a was not bombed. So it is a historical place where that goes back to Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So it was, I believe. Point noted that these existed long before the Western hegemony came, and I think 2026 will be a year for the global south to find its own and to find its own stories, to find its own networks and connectivity. So we are probably going to see more pivots for sure, but probably some of these pivots will become crucial in the development of the world. Also, because the changes that we are going to see and is not a phenomena for the present. It's going to sustain because these are all like economic cycle, as I always have said. For hundreds of years, at least since the Industrial Revolution, the global north, the whole world, the directions of innovations, money, knowledge have been from north to because of that, as you have see, as you have seen, as I've seen, the new wave of innovation now to flow from the global south. You talk about it's a global. We remove China from because of its presence from the global south discussion, but in any ways, it's here in our part of the world. But I just brought that example because to show that how the global south's innovations are going to trigger not catastrophic, tectonic shifts across the world, and the global north is basically looking for the south to offer more to them to grow. So is the tension that the global north is facing is about, okay, they cannot anymore trade with global south with the policies that they had before. They now need, and which is why they're forcing so much. They're forcing aid for trade, or let's say they're saying it to be trade, investment, and finance. You have to offer us something that we offer you something, but actually see they're not offering us something. So the point is the ball is in our court now, as I see. And if we are smart, whichever country in the global south is in controlling this ball and the game with the global north is going to come out as the winner. And as you said, our aim should be on 6 to 8% of GDP growth while containing the inflation to around 6%, which is where you were giving the calculation before in another discussion that we were having, that $1 trillion economy for Bangladesh is a possibility within 2035, but otherwise it is. And the reason why it is important for us is think about our age and our generation of people and our children. So 10 years, you and I would be almost like in our late 50s, right? And our children would be in their mid 20s. So it's important. It's two cycle of, but also it's important because in a country can then almost more than two times, right, of for Bangladesh, and that's prosperity, that's growth that we're looking for, and that growth will have to be driven by the inclusive growth agenda, which has now become kind of a very, very prominent agenda across the world. We did not touch upon it, but I would leave it, drop the point here. In the next year, the development financial institutions, they are going to be major development partners for the global south. They are coming with money. So the soft banks of Japan, they're coming. The European investment banks, they're coming, but their money will be invested in areas where the global south can sustain. And therefore, my conclusion is that it has to be the theme stability while pivoting. Two contrasting forces, but we'd have to manage. Over to you to conclude.
Oh, actually, you were right that the countries in global north, they would be competing rather than putting it that, like, they would bring money. I would frame the whole thing as they would be competing with each other, and we would be competing for their attention. So the Washington consensus world of the institutions of the global north, based in Washington, governed from Washington or New York or Rome, sort of Geneva. I mean, the UN. I think that global north, because of its own reasons, I think that stuff is being is the agent of that change. But basically, that architecture, that those things are being fragmented, and that fragmentation basically means, yeah, like countries like Japan or countries like, or the middle powers in middle powers of global north, rising power of China. There is a lot of geopolitical competition, fragmentation, and all of that stuff. And I think that would be another theme that we would need to cover, talk about. And structural changes, two perennial themes for global south. Those would be also the. But I'm also looking at the time. So tell me about your interesting meetings or observations or seeing, like, sort of that you had in the year that is ending.
So we're almost running out of time, but I'll so quickly, there were a lot. Some of it that I would deeply recall as changing my vision includes back-to-back summits in ASEAN and Kuala Lumpur in October, in the ASEAN Business Summit, and also the meetings that I had with partners and also in Kuala Lumpur, where actually ties that are being forced the global south. I just talked about the South African president, but actually the Canadian prime minister was also there, and then also British Prime Minister Keir Starmer joined in online. So actually, all the global leaders, most of the global leaders, did join the ASEAN Summit. So it kind of it has left a very deep impression how the global south is evolving, and I've seen right in front of me how the discussions were evolving around innovation, money flow, capital market investment, capital market growth, philanthropic investment, technology. So, and also artificial intelligence. So AI is being embraced as a big engine for growth. So the meetings that I had in Kuala Lumpur would be pivotal in my works. But in Ethiopia, I had a great meeting with our ambassador, Mr. Naim, in Ethiopia. So he and I both shared our hope that our Bangladesh missions can become engines of growth, economic growth for our country, because the missions do not actually work as a engine. So, but he is trying at his small chamber, but he's trying make the Ethiopian embassy a vessel for growth. But then just imagine the irony that we don't have visa to Ethiopia. See the irony. So that has to change, and that has to improve. And also my encounters with my colleagues in Cambridge and in University of Sussex, I've been working with them for a long time. And take my word, so when I work with for the Bangladesh talent and what Bangladesh can offer, and I feel it's who undersell ourselves. We do not see the power that we hold in the room. Now, I work in an international setting, and in I many people don't know, I also chair one of the regional Asia Pacific network, and in that capacity as a chair, I lead organizations across the ASEAN. Now, but the point to note is that I sit in meetings where there are so many different countries present from global north and global, and we are talking. And in that room, we are all equal, right? And we are all working together, right? We do not see like, okay, Bangladesh is a poor country. No. So they're deeply listening to me, my voice, because they think I can offer something. And the same for me. I'm learning from my colleagues in the north. I'm learning from my colleagues from Indonesia. So we are at equity there. I think the fundamental mistake that we do as a country is that we undersell ourselves. So I wear the hat of Bangladesh, and immediately I become poor in the eyes of people, and my demeanor, my expressions, they all become poor. And I think that's something that we need to rise high from that, and then we need to really wear the hat that no, I have the knowledge, I have the network, I have the capacity to offer something, and if we can as a nation rise to, we can grow. That's what my message.
That's a very uplifting note to end, and I would echo that. I would say that the most interesting meetings I have had were actually in Dhaka, where I met you and many other of our colleagues in various threads. Time. I'll just quickly name a few. If I'm very sorry if I'm not going to be able to list each of the fascinating, fantastic, hardworking individuals, but very quick shout outs to Shafiqur Rahman, to Zia Hassan, and a whole bunch of Asifs. Okay, so there is Asif Khan, there is Asif Iqbal, there is Asif Shahan, and Fahim Masroor. These are individuals I had interacted with, through various WhatsApp threads over the years, but had never had the pleasure to meet until in 2025. I'm not mentioning my old friends, so because you guys I have met many times before.
Gender parity, Jyoti, gender parity. So you're forgetting.
No. As I said, old friends of both genders. You know who you are. I have met you many times over the last, sort of throughout our lives. I'm just mentioning the individuals that I met for the first time in real life. So there is no gender disparity here. There had been other very interesting interactions with, but I think, like, sort of gender parity is there, but at the risk of gender parity, I don't want to, breach on people's privacy either. So we'll hold it at that.
But
But the point is that these are all very fascinating individuals, very hardworking individuals with, sort of lot of drive, lot of passion for what they do. And that echoes, Rubaiyat, what you've just said, that, in Bangladesh, there is actually a lot of energy. Bangladesh can teach a lot to others in global south. We probably hadn't done any of that because the politics was not conducive. When you are, living in under an oppressed government, and you think that, okay, this oppression is going to go on forever, you don't feel that, okay, you have anything to teach the world. But actually, we have kicked out that government. We are going to have, I expect, peaceful democratic transition. Leaving politics aside, we have also demonstrated economic resilience. And again, I go back to that picture, that bazaar. That bazaar had been there since the time of people who came from across the caravan trails from Central Asia and beyond. So it's a caravan bazaar. It's a bazaar of caravans and connectedness, did interacted engagement that we had with each other in the monsoon world. Okay, so in Bangladesh we had the monsoon revolution. We also forget, that this is the world of monsoon. This monsoon world that stretches from Africa to Central Asia. They from Indian Ocean to the Pacific, Atlantic to the Pacific. Yeah. On that note, global South. Look forward to seeing each other from different corners of global South, talking about all of these things.
and the theme is stability to peace and growth. So thank you everyone for listening to J&J. We will be back in 2020 and with a more globalized show. So listen to us. We share our experience from around the globe, connecting the dots and trying to build a harmonious.
And write to us. Let us know, comments, suggestions, both from, substantive issues to technical issues,
And also
how we
your
should look at
story
the
from the
camera.
global south and your
Yes.
story from the global south. If you want to join us in one of our show, let us know.